That's very loud. Okay, so good morning, everybody. So today now is October 19th, and we'll do 3 bows, even mentally, to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3. And then we'll do the salutation one time. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the fully enlightened one. And then I'm going to share the screen. Okay, we just do it straight. Okay, is the text visible?
Yes, Bhante, we can see the text.
Okay. Let's 1:30. We could boost it a few points.
Yeah, that's perfect, Bhante.
Okay. Okay, so we've been reading now, we're still working our way through the Anguttara Nikaya book of sixes, and we are in Sutta number 63, which is, we saw last time, it's a long and rather complex sutta with 6 main divisions, and each main division, which has 6 main topics, each subdivision or each division looks at that main topic from 6 different angles. So altogether, the sutta consists of like 36 themes, 36 perspectives. And the 6 main topics are sensual pleasures, sensual pleasures, which we dealt with last week. Then comes feelings, perceptions, the asavas, translated here as taints, karma, and then lastly, dukkha or suffering. So those are the main topics. And then each topic is to be dealt with by way of the subject matter itself. So just what we did last time, that would be sensual pleasures, then the source and origin of that particular subject, then the diversity within that subject, then the result of that subject, the cessation of that subject, and the way to the cessation of that subject. So those are the 6 subordinate themes: the topic itself, its origin, its diversity, its result, its cessation, and the way leading to its cessation. And as I mentioned last week, I found that there is a parallel or counterpart to the sutta preserved in the Chinese translation of the Majjhima Agama. I think that's the version of the Majjhima Nikaya preserved, I believe, in the Sarvastivada school. So that was translated into Chinese, and it's in the Majjhima Agama Sutta number 111. And so we were looking at some of the interesting variations. And so last week we spent the whole period on sensual pleasures. Now we come to the section on feelings. So it's said here that feelings should be understood and so forth, and the way leading to the cessation of feelings should be understood. So for what reason was this said? And then the text tells us that there are these three feelings. So this is quite sort of standard analysis of feelings that we find throughout the Sutta Pitaka. Feelings divided into pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and then the feeling that's neither painful nor pleasant, which in brief, simply we can call this neutral feeling. And I've pointed this out before, but again, I'll repeat the point that what is meant by feelings, or in Pali, Vedana, is not the same as what we call feelings in English. What we call feelings in English often is synonymous with emotion. But in Pali, the word Vedana means not emotion as such, but we might call this the felt tone of an experience. So all experiences, all acts of awareness, according to the Buddha's teaching, are accompanied by some feeling, some felt tone, and that felt tone can be either pleasant. So I have here a drink which is sweet, so when I take a sip of it, then I get a pleasant feeling. I scrape my arm against a rough surface, and that's a painful feeling. And also there are pleasant feelings and painful feelings that accompany mental events, or that are accompanied by, let's say, states of mind consciousness. So the feeling that comes from taking a pleasant drink, a sweet drink, that is, we could say it's a physical feeling. Similarly, the painful feeling that comes from scraping my arm against a rough surface, or getting stung by a mosquito, that will be a painful bodily feeling. But okay, somebody praises me, and then there comes a pleasant mental feeling. Somebody sharply criticizes me, then there comes a painful mental feeling. So the body is not involved in that directly, but it's the mind is either joyful or dejected. And then there's the neutral feeling. So probably most of the feelings that we're experiencing, we just take a walk around on a rather dreary day, and we're glancing left and right, and there's nothing particularly uplifting, nothing particularly disagreeable. And so we're just, as we're walking along, we're experiencing these neutral feelings. Okay, so that is the threefold division of feeling. And actually in some other texts, like in the Vedana Samyutta, we actually have explicit distinctions made in the pleasant feeling and painful feeling, so that the bodily feeling is called simply pleasant feeling, whereas the pleasant mental feeling is called somanassa, joyful feeling, and the painful bodily feeling is simply called painful feeling, and the painful mental feeling is called domanassa, dejection, sadness, sorrow, any synonym. And then the neutral feeling is called upekkha vedana, equanimous feeling. Okay, then what is the source and origin of feelings? And then again, this is a continuous or constantly repeated idea in the discourses. The origin of feeling is contact. And so what is contact? So there are three elements involved in contact. So there's a sense faculty, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, up to the mind faculty. Then the sense an object, a visible form, sound. And for the mind base, it could be some mental object. And then there's the awareness of that, the cognition of that, of that, which is consciousness. And so contact is defined as the coming together of these three things. And the way I sort of elaborate on that, contact is the meeting, the encounter of consciousness with its object through the sense faculty. So whenever consciousness arises, it encounters an object, and it encounters that object through one or another of the sense faculties. If it's a visible object, I'm looking at a picture or out at the scenery. So there's visible objects, and there's the eye consciousness encountering those visible objects through the eye, and the meeting of consciousness with the visible objects. I see the trees and the lake. That is contact. I hear some voice speaking. That's a sound object. The ear consciousness arises. It encounters the sound through the ear faculty. That is ear contact. And so we have 6 kinds of contact. And I saw last week, I only get to see the chat box when I'm closing down the program. I don't get to see it while the program is going on. Some people were bringing up the idea that for contact to take place, there has to be some notion of I or self. It's not the case. Whether it's an arhat completely free of all conceits or views of self and I, or the deluded person of the world, fully immersed in the enjoyment of sensual pleasures, whenever consciousness meets the object, its contact is taking place, and contact is giving rise to feeling. So the difference between the arahat and the deluded person of the world is not that the deluded person has contact, the arahat doesn't have contact. Both have contact and feelings. The difference is that for the worldly person, craving will arise in response to the feelings. Craving for the pleasant feeling, a craving to escape from the painful feelings, and perhaps a kind of dull acceptance or indulgence in the neutral feelings. Whereas for the arahat, the feeling will arise and the feeling is known as it is, but there's no craving or aversion arising in regard to those feelings. Okay, so let us then continue. So we have the source and origin of feelings, so that is contact. When contact arises, then contact is like the trigger, which triggers the arising of a feeling. Okay, so then what is the diversity of feelings? And so the diversity of feelings here, the text actually sort of makes distinctions amongst these 3 primary types of feelings. So it says that there is, here it's translated, a worldly pleasant feeling and a spiritual or non-worldly pleasant feeling. There's a worldly painful feeling and a spiritual painful feeling. There's a worldly neither painful nor pleasant feeling and a spiritual neither painful nor pleasant feeling. So that is called the diversity of feelings. And then we have a note here. Let's see if the note says anything. Okay, so the word that's translated as worldly is sa misa, and the word, okay, sa misa. Is a combination of sa, which means with, and amisa. And the word amisa, the original sense is something like food. And it's even used in regard to like a fisherman puts bait on the hook, and the bait is amisa. And so amisa is the actual applied meaning is not restricted to food, but things that sort of draw one in, that suck one in, and that keep one in bondage and an attachment. So that would be, I roughly translated it as worldly. And this would be according to the commentarial way of explanation. So these would be feelings that are connected with sensual desires. Yeah, we'll take the questions later. Okay, so we have this worldly, or even we could call this carnal feelings, which are distinguished as pleasant, painful, and pleasant, painful, and neutral. So the pleasant worldly feelings will be, I have a craving for, okay, we could say a craving for certain types of curries. I remember, maybe you could see this with these Indian spices, Indian spice dishes, which create a strong craving. And so when you get that, when you are able to indulge in it, it gives rise to a worldly, pleasant feeling. So when you satisfy any of the senses with its object that gives rise to a worldly, pleasant feeling, then there's also the worldly, painful feeling. So this is a painful feeling connected with sensual desires. Okay, I'm in love with a beautiful girl, and then she rejects me. And so there's a worldly, painful feeling connected with sensual desires, and there's a worldly, neutral feeling. You can use your imagination for that. I can't think of an example offhand. Okay, then we have the opposite of this is a spiritual feeling, and this is, the Pali word is near amisa. The prefix near gives a sense of negation or omission. And so this is a feeling which is detached from sensual desires. It's not necessarily a lokuttara feeling, a world-transcending feeling. So often the example given for the spiritual pleasant feeling will be the blissful feeling within the jhanas, within the first three jhanas. So that is a very high degree of blissful, pleasant feeling, and it's a spirit, and because it's detached from sensual desires, so it's near amisa, a pleasant spiritual feeling. But even at a lower level, we could say a Buddhist devotee looks at goes to maybe India on pilgrimage, and they see, maybe they arrive at Bodh Gaya, the site of the Buddha's enlightenment, and they feel an uplifting joy and happiness. And so that is a spiritual, pleasant feeling. It's not, of course, it's not at the level of the jhanas, it's still involved with sense perception, but it's a uplifting, pleasant spiritual feeling. And then there's the spiritual painful feeling. So this is the painful feeling that comes Maybe you experience this very often, I do. You're yearning to have a deeply concentrated mind, to be able to enter into some kind of samadhi, and the mind is overrun by distracting, disturbing thoughts, and you feel a kind of disappointment, frustration with one's practice. So that's a painful feeling, and yet it's directed towards a spiritual goal. And so we could say it's niramisa. It's not a painful feeling connected with worldly enjoyments, but with spiritual attainments. And so that is the painful spiritual feeling. And then there is a neutral spiritual feeling. Again, you could use your imagination to fill that in. So that is the way the Pali text distinguishes the diversity within feeling. The Chinese text, here I didn't put the actual Chinese text itself, but I did a translation. But for those who know Chinese and can find this Majjhima Agama 111, the passage begins 599 C13. And this is an interesting difference between the Pali version and the Chinese, that the Pali simply enumerates the types of feelings, but the Chinese says that the monk should know when experiencing each of these feelings. So the Chinese always brings the exposition or connects the exposition to the need to know the particular subject. Okay, so when experiencing a pleasant feeling, the monk should know he's experiencing a pleasant feeling. And the same with the painful feeling, with the neutral feeling, then whether it's a bodily feeling, pleasant, painful, and neutral, whether a mental feeling, pleasant, painful, neutral, then we have the worldly feeling, pleasant, painful, neutral, and the spiritual feeling, pleasant, painful, and neutral. Then the Chinese has sensual feeling, and the same threefold division among sensual feelings and non-sensual feelings. Though this seems to be almost as if there was a commentary on the meaning of worldly and unworldly. Oh, I don't see the unworldly here. I must have missed that, but it must be there. Oh, here it's spiritual, okay. So it seems as if there could have been maybe a scribe commenting on these unusual expressions. In Chinese, it comes out the same like in Pali as with food and without food. So it seems that there might have been a scribe commenting and indicating that with food or worldly means sensual, and without food or spiritual means non-sensual. And then that comment by the scribe got incorporated into the text of the sutra. And so basically you could see a great deal of similarity between the Pali and the Chinese, though the Chinese is a bit more elaborate, taking in material from other sources and putting it into the text. Okay, so that is the diversity of feeling. Then we come to the result of feelings. I found this a bit odd within the Pali version. Okay, so it says, one produces an individual existence that corresponds with or that accords with whatever feeling one experiences. In other words, one undergoes a rebirth that means producing an individual existence. One takes on a new form of existence that corresponds with whatever feeling one experiences. And that may be the consequence either of merit, in which case one gets a rebirth into a good destination, a fortunate rebirth, or the consequence of demerit, in which case one acquires a bad rebirth, rebirth into a undesirable realm of existence. So that is called the result of feeling. And it seems to me, as I said, rather peculiar. And the Chinese is very simple, and to my mind is clearer. So what is the result of feeling? So the Chinese is simply like following here the sequence of dependent origination. So what is the result of feeling? So craving is the result of feeling. So that is like in dependent origination, Vedana Pachaya Tanha, with feeling as a condition, craving arises. And then what is the cessation of feelings? And this is referring, it seems, to the moment-by-moment cessation of feelings. So with the cessation of contact, there is cessation of feelings. So at each moment there is a contact, a particular feeling arises, and with the cessation of that contact, the feeling ceases. So I take this sip of this drink, which is a bit sweet. There's the contact with the substance, and I perceive the sweet taste, and so the pleasant feeling arises. The contact ends, and that pleasant feeling comes to an end. And then what is the path leading to, then what is the way leading to the cessation of feelings? It's the Noble Eightfold Path. That is the way leading to the cessation of feelings. Yeah, but here it seems the cessation, that there's a difference in what is intended by cessation of feelings in this paragraph, the one on cessation of feelings, and in the statement on the way leading to the cessation of feelings. Because the cessation of feelings from moment to moment comes with the cessation of contact, but the complete, let's say, liberation from feelings comes with liberation from the cycle of repeated birth and death. And the Noble Eightfold Path is the way leading to the cessation, leading to liberation of, the Noble Eightfold Path is the way leading to liberation from birth and death. And so it's the way leading to the ultimate cessation of contact, and thereby the ultimate cessation of feelings. And then comes the concluding passage here. So when the noble disciple thus understands feeling, the source and origin of feelings, its diversity, the result of feelings, the cessation of feelings, and the way to the cessation of feelings, then he understands this penetrative spiritual life to be the cessation of feelings. And again, cessation of feelings here has to be understood as the ultimate liberation from feelings. That's the way I understand that. Okay, so that is the cessation on feelings, the section on feelings. And now we could see if we have some questions. Let me find, the participant list. Okay, so we start off with Samangi.
Yes, Bhante, thank you for your teachings. You mentioned about amisa. I have heard that word in different contexts, so that's why I was trying to connect it. Amisa is that something like attachment? Because there is amisa puja, which is kind of like veneration or something, and there is the pratipatti puja, which is the practice, as I translate it in. So is there a connection between amisa and amisa puja? Is amisa puja kind of like wanting a better life? How is it
Yeah,
connected? How is it
yeah.
connected?
There's some connection, but it's not that amisa is attachment itself. But here, amisa is used in the sense of material things. So the amisa puja, that is the offering to the Buddha, to the Buddha image, offering of things like incense, candles, food, water or drinks. Yeah, so it's the offering of material things. And then that is contrasted with Patipatti Puja, which is the offering of practice, that one engages in the practice. And one's practice is considered an offering to the Buddha. Yeah, so it's a simple difference between the offering of material things and then the offering of practice. Like when we do this chant, Imaya Dhammano Dhamma Patipattiya Buddhang Pujami. So that is, I venerate the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, with this practice in accordance with the Dhamma.
So it's not related to the amisa that you mentioned now, today in the sutta.
Not directly, it's just that the amisa here has this, in that, as a puja, has a sense of the offering of material things.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Marcy. You have to unmute. Okay, I don't see anymore. Okay, so now we come to Amy.
Thank you, Bhante, for the teaching. Earlier with the differences between the Pali version and the Chinese version, where the Chinese version saying that the result of feeling is craving, and then the Pali version, it's the individual existence. Was it just that the Pali version kind of skipped over the craving, clinging, and went directly to existence? I'm just wondering. Thank you, Bhante.
Actually, that's a good point. Actually, I didn't think of that, but it seems almost as if, let me just take a look at that again. Yeah, that's a good point. It could be that the Pali version is sort of extending the links in the chain of dependent origination from feeling to craving through clinging to bhava, to existence. Yeah, I didn't think of it from that angle, but you could have a good point there.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, Franz?
Good morning, Bhante. My question is Vedana is the result of coming together of sense and objects and sense consciousness. Then why is the translation of Vedana into feeling and not sensation?
Why is the translation feeling, not sensation? Yeah, this is just a matter of personal choice, but to my mind, I know that some people, particularly, I think Goenka uses sensation, is that correct? He says Vedananupasana, contemplation of sensations. But to my mind, the word sensation has a narrower meaning, signifying things that one feels exclusively in the body. So there will be like a tingling sensation, a chilling, a sensation of chills in the body, sensation of throbbing in the body, sensation of pressure, sensation of heat or cold in the body. So that's a rather narrow, so it seems that the word sensation would be applicable almost only to kaya vedana, to bodily feelings, and not so much to feelings that arise through the vedana that arise through the other senses. But again, feeling has the disadvantage that in English, it sort of shades off into emotion. So you have to make your choices. But through the years, I've chosen feeling. Okay, did Amy have another question?
No, sorry, I forgot to lower hand.
Okay.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, then we go Tim.
Yeah, yes, Bhante, I just wanted to align with what you said. That was my my first practice was Ubaken Gwenka. And yeah, it's 90% of the emphasis is on sensation.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
then what you're doing with the Goenka method, you're observing what is going on in the body, so it's really bodily sensations.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I won't say I've moved away from that, but I'm listening to you and the other monastics and kind of expanding that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I see one more. I'll take one more question, then we'll move on. So this is Doran.
Thank you, Bhante. I've seen a translation more recently for Vedana that says feeling tones, which I really like. And also, I wanted to point out that in psychology recently, there seems to be a lot of picking up on these feeling tones in modern psychology, and a lot of people believing it's a good place to sort of stop the links of dependent origination. Of course, they're not talking about dependent origination, but to stop the links of going on to further proliferation in a good way, you know. So a lot of people are talking about Vedana today all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean, feeling tone is, in my mind, it captures the meaning of Vedana. But, through the years, I would use feeling as the translation, but when I have to give an explanation, then I would say what is meant by Vedana or feeling is the felt tone or flavor, even, or the flavor, or even you could use a more sophisticated term, but this is a more psychological term.
Thank you.
Hedonic tone. But people think that would necessarily imply that one is speaking about hedonists, which is not necessarily the case, but hedonic refers to the way one experiences feelings. Okay, I want to try to get in the next section. And so this is of the sutta. So now we're coming to what is called in Pali sanya, which I translate as perception. And so perception should be understood, etc. It begins just with the summary statement. And now then we come to the analysis. Okay, so what is perception? And so there are these 6 perceptions. And so interestingly, we have perceptions are differentiated by way of their object. So perceptions of forms, sounds, odors, tastes, then tactile objects, or maybe we could even call this textures, and then perception of purely mental phenomena. So I have images, ideas, concepts, judgments, propositions, assessments, and so on, all those purely mental objects. And of course, in Pali, the word for the mental phenomena is the word Dhamma. And the word translated perception is sanya, which is from the prefix sam plus the root nya, which means to know. But don't try to get the meaning of sanya by combining the prefix and the root. You just have to see how the term is used. So the Pali version, we have this sort of standard distinction of 6 types of perception. And the way perception or sanya is formally defined is said to be that mental function that grasps or focuses in on the distinctive features or qualities of objects. And that does so as a basis for recognition. So I believe in the Thai language, the words corresponding to sanya is used in the sense of memory. But that is what I would call an extended meaning. But the original sense is not of sanya is not memory, but the noting of the qualities or features of things as a basis for memory. So if I've never met a person before, so I'm introduced to that person, and so I take in that person's, say, facial features, then when I'm walking down the street in New York, I pass that person, or I see that person walking towards me, then I can recognize that person because I've perceived their features on an earlier occasion. So even perception of sounds, sometimes if you hear a voice coming from another room, you can identify who the person is based on their voice, because in the past you've had an association of the person with the sound of their voice. And so the perception of sound serves as a basis for identification, for memory and identification. Okay, so this is the Pali version. The Chinese version is a bit, to my mind, it's a bit strange. So it says, what is perception? So it says there are these 4 perceptions. A monk knows a limited perception, knows a great or large perception. I think that's Da Xiang. This, I think, is Wei Xiang, maybe. Knows a measureless perception. I think it's Wu Liang Xiang. And knows the perception of nothingness, Wu So You Xiang. So that is called knowing perception. Yeah, we find in the Pali sources, elsewhere we find mention of a limited perception and the measureless perception. The two are contrasted. And there's said to be a perception that pertains to the base of nothingness. But bringing these in as the types of perception, to my mind, it's not so cogent, not so reasonable as the distinction of 6 kinds of perception that we find in the Pali version of the sutta. Okay, so what is the source and origin of perception? Again, contact is their source and origin. So at the same time that when a contact takes place, there's a feeling arises, and also a perception arises, the perception by which you identify or attempt to identify the object. And then what is the diversity of perceptions? And basically this seems very much the same as simply when the Buddha, when the text is explaining what is perception, there are these 6 perceptions. So all it is saying here in the diversity of perceptions, saying that each type of perception is different from the other types of perceptions. So the perception of forms is one thing, the perception of sounds is another, the perception of odors, the perception of taste, the perception of tactile objects, the perception of mental phenomena. Each of these is different from the others. Yeah, but what's interesting, though, is that the perception of mental phenomena can take place on the basis of perception of the other types of sense objects. For example, if we have different shades of blue, okay, don't mind my point. Okay, so this gentleman here has a blue pullover, and Venerable Changray has a blue jacket, and yeah, the ornamentation on this cup is in blue. So they're different colors, or different shades, but I identify them as shades of blue. So that is a kind of mental perception which is able somehow to unify the different shades under a common heading, calling them blue. Perhaps some other people, in a different culture, these two or these three would be considered different colors, not different shades of the same color. Like even in Pali, there's the word nila, which we translate as blue, but in Pali, it's used for things that are blue and also things that are green. I don't know in contemporary Indian languages whether there's a clear distinction. Are you of Indian origins? Is there? Yeah, I think you told me last week that you're from Maharashtra. Is there a clear distinction between blue and green?
Yes, the colors, yes.
So they are distinguished.
Yeah,
But in
green,
Pali,
green is hara.
hara.
And hara, yeah.
Okay, so there's also harita.
Yeah, so different languages have different words for
Yeah,
this color.
yeah. So in Pali, harita is like grass, the wild growing grass. So that's taken to be green, yeah. And then just another example, let's see. Okay, like sounds, like even you hear my voice speaking, so what is actually taking in the sound of my voice is perception of sounds, but then hopefully people are obtaining meaning out of the words that I'm speaking. So the meaning is a perception of mental phenomena, since meaning is a mental phenomena, but the mental phenomena of meaning is conveyed by sounds. And so on the basis of perception of sounds, then the mind consciousness has a perception of meaning, the meaning of the sounds. Okay, let's move on. Okay, then we have the result of perception. This is interesting. So it says that I say that perceptions result in expression in whatever way one perceives something. In just that way, one expresses oneself, saying, I perceive such and such. So that is called the result of perception. So if I see a crow, so there's the bird, the crow, so there's a perception, and somebody asks me, what did you say? What did you see? And I say, I saw a crow. Of course, the perception can be wrong. It could have been a hawk, but I express myself on the basis of what I perceive. Okay, so it's a little bit odd to say that this is the result of perception. Of course, there are other suttas which have a series in which perception leads to vitakka, thoughts. So perception is, to say, a more basic, more primitive, more elementary stage in the process of cognition. And then from perception comes thoughts. And so we have, one example is kama sanya. That's a sensual perception. So you perceive something as being sensually enticing, sensually attractive, sensually arousing. And then you have kama vitakka, a sensual thought. Then you start getting overwhelmed by sensual thoughts in regard to the object of which you had a sensual perception. Then there's vyapada sanya, that is a perception governed by ill will. So you see somebody that you dislike, a hostile, disagreeable person, so that would be a vyapada sanya, a ill will perception. And then based on that perception, there will arise vyapada vitaka, thoughts of ill will. You start thinking bad thoughts about that person. Okay, what is the cessation of perceptions? So with the cessation of contact, there is cessation of perceptions. So this is the same as in relation to feelings. And then the Noble Eightfold Path is the way leading to the cessation of perceptions. And again, it seems to me that we have to make a distinction in two different ways of understanding the cessation of perceptions. Here, in this paragraph, the cessation of perceptions, it seems, is the moment by moment or instant by instant cessation of perceptions that comes about with the cessation of contact. So if I've met together with a certain person, having some conversation with that person, so there's a contact with the person and a perception of that person. The person, he says, bye-bye, see you later, he goes away, then there's no more mental contact with that person. And so the perception of that person has stopped. So that's sort of the temporary cessation of perceptions. But it seems that what the Noble Eightfold Path leads to is not the cessation of the perception of my friend. I don't have to cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path to put an end to the perception of my friend who goes out the door. But the Noble Eightfold Path leads to the liberation from, say, the continuity of the five aggregates, including the aggregate of perceptions. So the Noble Eightfold Path leads to the ultimate cessation of perception, the liberation from the five aggregates, including perceptions. Okay, and then the concluding paragraph says, when the noble disciple thus understands perception from these six angles, perception itself, the origin of perceptions, diversity of perceptions, result of perceptions, cessation of perceptions, and the way leading to the cessation of perceptions, he understands this penetrative spiritual life, I think it's Nibbedika Brahmacharya, to be the cessation of perceptions. And again here, the cessation of perceptions, I think, should be understood as the ultimate final liberation from perceptions. Because the penetrative spiritual life is the spiritual life of the noble paths, the world transcending paths, which brings liberation from the round of birth and death, and thereby from the process of perceptions, of perception. Okay, now we could see if we have any further additional questions. Okay, so I see first question comes from Vandana.
Thank you, Bhante, for your teaching. So I'm just wondering about this cessation of perceptions. So sometime on the basis of perceptions, we make decisions, sometimes very important decisions based on our perceptions. For example, if I have to take any course or something, first I have to create a perception.
You have to take a what?
If I have to take some classes or something, anything, I have to plan for something, I need to have that perception, and then I will make the decision. So we're talking about the cessation of only negative perceptions or all kind of
No,
perceptions?
not only negative perceptions. And, oh, I see, within the You mean the Noble Eightfold Path is the way to the cessation of perceptions?
Yes.
Oh, you're referring to that passage?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that is not referring to things like the perceptions that you need to get
Get by.
to
Okay.
get around in one's everyday
Yeah.
life.
Right.
No,
Not like that. Okay.
no, no. This is the way I understand it. Like this is the ultimate liberation from the continuity of birth and death and the perceptions that arise as part of the package of the five aggregates. But of
Okay.
course, we
Seeing
need
seeing that noble truth. Yes. Okay.
we need to maintain perceptions to get through our everyday life, both say the ordinary mundane perceptions and also maybe perceptions which are governed by yoniso manasikara, by wise attention or wise consideration.
Get it. Thank you so much.
Okay, Gita.
Thank you, Bhante, first of all, for all the teachings. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We're so lucky to have you. Bhante, my question to you, it seems like perception and feelings, the common factor is contact. So if one, because we come into contact with things every day in our life, how can we use contact to see through adinava, the dangers? Like, how do you do that, Bhante? Like if you see a cup of tea, the difference between a regular and an arhat is they take the cup of tea, they can feel a sweet taste or bitter taste or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So then how can we see like the danger not to be attached to anything because we're trying to stop samsaric rebirth? How can we skillfully do that, Bhante?
Yeah, I say that one doesn't see the danger so much in contact or in feeling itself. Of course, one has to say, maybe you could say a danger in certain types of contact, certain types of feelings, but primarily one sees the danger. This is in case of ordinary sort of innocent contacts that take place in the course of our ordinary life. One sees the danger in the craving or other defilements that arise
Got it.
to those contacts.
I got it. So when you see craving arising, that's when you apply a dinava and see the danger.
Exactly.
Thanks, Bhante. That was perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it just came to mind. It's the Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya number 13. But actually, there are many suttas which do speak about the danger in feelings. Okay, I think, let me see if I could remember what they say about the danger of feeling. So pleasant feeling, maybe the danger in pleasant feeling is that it is sort of a bait or lure or basis for craving. So that is a danger in pleasant feelings. The danger in painful feeling is simply that it is painful, and so one wants to avoid pain. And the danger in the neutral feelings is that they are, even though they're neutral, indifferent, bland, but the danger is that they are impermanent. And so towards a neutral feeling, one could develop what I call a blind indifference or a blind indulgence. And so to avoid that kind of subtle attachment to the neutral feeling, one recognizes them as impermanent. And this also is referring sometimes specifically to the neutral feeling that comes with the higher jhanic attainments, especially the fourth jhana, in which there's that neutral feeling. And so some meditators who attain that fourth jhana and can experience the peace, the tranquility of that fourth jhana, develop a subtle attachment to it.
Yes, that's
And
true.
so the way to sort of overcome that subtle attachment is by penetrating the
Impermanence.
impermanent nature of that neutral feeling.
That's perfect, Bhante. Thank you so much. Sadhu.
Okay, Doran, and that will have to be the last question for the day. Doran?
Thank you so much, Bhante, again for taking my question. I'm having a little trouble understanding this section on perceptions. It was my understanding that its liberation is not the cessation of perceptions, but cessation of clinging to them as I or myself.
Yeah.
The same for all the five aggregates. Is it?
Go on.
So here they're saying cessations of perceptions stop, but perhaps they mean that we stop to cling to them. They may still go on, but we stop to cling to them as me.
Yeah, that's certainly the sort of approach that has to be taken in our day-to-day life, in our regular Dhamma practice, is, that's applying the contemplation of non-self and not to the five aggregates and now specifically to the aggregate of perception. So when it's not bringing about the cessation of perceptions, but one is contemplating all perception as being not mine, not I, not myself. So that is the contemplation that leads to insight in regard to perception. But the ultimate goal, I think what the sutta is pointing to by saying that the penetrative spiritual life is the cessation of perceptions, I think here it's referring to, by cessation of perceptions, the unconditioned nibbana element, and that is to be attained, to be realized and attained by understanding perception from the six angles that have been presented in this section of the sutta.
Thank you.
And that's the way I understand it, though I can't say that I have myself a perfectly clear, lucid, infallible understanding of this passage. It needs interpretation.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we'll be ending the session for the day. And so we're going to be ending the session with the sharing of the merits. And so we'll be sharing the merits with the devas, the nagas, and the other beings, asking them to protect the Buddha Sasana, to protect the teaching, and to protect ourselves, others, and the world. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Dukkha patachani dukkha, bhaya patachani bhaya, soka patachani soka, antu sabe pipanino. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. And then we're going to end with 3 physical bows to the Buddha. So I have the chime here, and we'll stand up. Okay, 1, 2, 3.
And a bow to Bhante Bodhi. Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you,
Okay,
Bhante.
thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante. Have a good lunch.
Thank you,
Sadhu
Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Safe and well, Bhante. Tiruvan Sadnai. Namo
Thank you,
Buddhaya.
Bhante. Thank you.
Very much,
Thank you,
Safe and well,
Bhante.
Bhante. We'll see you. Have a good lunch. Take care. We'll see you on
Thank you,
Wednesday.
Bhante.
Tiruvan
Thank you so
Sadnai.
much, Bhante.
Lunch, yes, Bhante.
Thank you,
Be well,
Bhante.
Bhante. Bye, Bhante. Be well.
Okay, so
Thank you, Bhante.
the session now.
Thank you, Bhante, for your teaching.